Hi, everybody. This is Joe Giegerich and Shaili Modi, kicking off the 2024 Project Ready Podcast series. Previous podcast we had were the 2023 year in review. It was probably released after 2023, but we did it in 2023. Other previous podcasts, Little Things, Big Results. This seems to be a pretty popular one we released, and it's all about how these constant inefficiencies in your workforce days add up to very, very high overhead, and solving them really has big results in terms of ROI. Upcoming podcast, How to Optimize Search in the AEC. And another one is, what is a data warehouse and why does it matter? What does it mean to the AECO? And my contention on the data warehouse is it's much like AI. A data warehouse can take on a lot of flavors. There's a lot of use for one, but there's also a lot of claims one way or the other. Anyway, we're going to seek to define that in a meaningful way. And your data warehouse is what feeds your ability to have AI, which ties back into garbage in, garbage out, one of our previous podcasts. So today, what we want to do is we want to discuss a little bit about the challenges of IT pros in the AEC. IT professionals have their own day-to-day challenges, everything from making sure the servers are up and running and emails going. But the AEC has some particular challenges as it relates to the IT professional. For one, historically, very lean budgets within IT departments in the AEC typically, although we've seen a lot of the rise of the digital innovation officer, if you will. This is a title that we've seen really grow in the last 5 years. But nonetheless, IT, in the classic sense of keeping the lights on, if you will, they have a lot more light bulbs they have to screw in every day. So, in other words, there are just way too many platforms. You're not going to, drum we beat, but it's something the industry is, knows very well, is that every project's going to have a half a dozen different systems, be they your own or somebody else's, and the combination will constantly change depending on the project, depending on the sponsor, depending on who your partner is or vendor is. So, with that, all those platforms present a series of cascading challenges. One is the setup and the setup time around it. Not only we're going to provision and set up something, but also the time to value for your customers to get to these really powerful tools that you've invested in quickly so they can do their job. And then with that setup is the setup of security, the maintenance of security, and then the integration of all that data, which goes into a data warehouse. And again, all this on lean budgets and tight timelines. And it's been the nature of IT as long as I've been in it, which is, I'll date myself. So, was that 1976? I was 14. I started on mainframes, became a web developer in the 90s. I've been through the industry quite a bit. When I got to the early 2000s, I was a systems engineer. So, moral of that story is IT changes constantly. And with that, the skill set and disposition, if you will, of IT pros changes as well. And there's this really requisite need to constantly stay current. I can continue to go on. I'm infamous for that capability. But let's start, Shaylee. Let me turn this over to you. I rattled off some, high level, but I think rather persisting challenges out there. Why don't you pick one and give us your feedback and take on the whole thing?
Taking on with too many platforms. I think that's definitely something we've been talking about consistently and looking from the perspective of IT. There's a lot that goes with managing all of these platforms. So that is something that is, anyways, on IT to begin with. Managing the settings and the platforms and making sure the users are all kind of having access to all of these. But the biggest challenge is the interoperability between all of these, because end users are constantly kind of in and out of multiple systems. And we've seen that happen so much lately, where IT is now kind of facing the issue where they need to kind of have something where end users have that single location to interact with all of these different platforms, and not just kind of bringing them all together, but also, as you mentioned, Joe, that at the project level we need to set up a project in all of these different systems, make sure they are all consistent. There are different teams working on different platforms, and it's very difficult to kind of just bring that all together, thinking of all the different things that IT has to do in setting up all of these different systems.
And it kind of begs the question and is a bit counter to our podcast on It's a Modular World. Because you would think on that basis, right, that If I have all these systems, shouldn't I narrow how many systems I'm running? Challenge with that is you never will get down to one platform. None of your partners and owners will all be using the same platform. And now you're forcing end users to adopt to a product to support their job rather than in the context of a project. So, with that having been said, you're still better off looking at things as modules. But I'll sort of throw a leading question out there. So, with all these platforms and all those challenges, what is the solution, Shaylee?
Yeah, well, definitely something like Project Ready. But I would say that
Yeah, but
the
Project Ready, which does a lot of automation, and that's really where
right,
I was
right.
going. Was
Hmm.
it's not about settling for one monolithic platform or another, and brute force is just always a bad idea. I just think it's all about automation.
Yeah, automation of the setup and everything that is required to have users working on projects in a multitude of different systems. But the challenge of bringing all of these different platforms together as well, because be it Autodesk or Microsoft Procore, they all have a rich set of APIs. However, out of the box, they don't really interact with each other in a very functional way.
Yeah, minimally actually.
So it comes on to the IT department then when the end users have these ad hoc requests where they're trying to just build something which is a very specific use case that may not be basically a long term solution because they're working as a small team, they're thinking of one solution, whereas a product like Project Ready, we've kind of architected it in a way at a high level, kind of brings all of these different systems together. And then, as an add on, of course, there can be additional use cases and workflows that we support as well that interact between different systems. But it just, I think it's important that at that architectural level, in a simple way, brings basically all of these different platforms together, which would really help the IT team to just kind of have that off their plates essentially.
Yeah, from the get-go, right? This is something that we do emphasize, don't figure out how to integrate once it's in flight, have a plan to integrate or a tool like ours to integrate out of the gate. And this is something that is reminiscent of one of the things that Sala Eckhart had mentioned on a previous podcast was the idea of having a data plan up front. Now, there are systems involved in here as well that IT pros have to deal with, uptime and all the rest of it. But having that plan out of the gate, I think is also a key part of that strategy. And I'll throw some factoids out here as well. So just some stuff that marketing was kind enough to present to me. In the last 3 years, the volume of available project data has doubled. Hence the data warehouse podcast that we have coming up. 35% of construction firms, which includes design firms, cite a lack of staff to support the technology. And this is the other thing too that I'm very bullish on, having run a consultancy and now a SaaS product and company is I personally think, a suggestion I have for IT pros is staff where it makes sense, hire consultants for those more rare pieces, if that makes sense. Just friendly tip. This one's great. Up to 30% of initial data created during design and construction phases is lost by project closeout. And that data can make or break you in litigation. It can make or break you in terms of compliance and certainly things like ISO 19650. So going back to that, let's say people were not using Project Ready, although obviously we're here today hoping that you will because we have solved a lot of this. Some tips or suggestions or other observations, Shaylee?
Yeah, definitely. And I think to add on to the stat that you just mentioned on data being lost, I think we've seen that happen so many times because there's no interoperability between these systems. So people end up emailing attachments and files because users are always looking for easy ways to just make sure that the documents are sent or received. And then anything that just goes out through emails, there's no place to track that. Basically, if you delete that email, you've lost that whole communication that these documents were sent. So things like these where then whenever there's no kind of process in place of how when somebody has no access to a project that is being run in Autodesk, how would you send the content to these users? And for a project when there's an involvement of Procore, of SharePoint, of Microsoft Teams, of Autodesk, how to make sure that all of the documents in these are basically tracked. There's metadata on all of this, which is really important. That needs to be tracked as well.
Yeah, and the metadata helps you track it as
Hmm.
well, right?
Yeah,
It's a chicken and egg kind of situation.
yeah, definitely. And on what point people are setting the metadata, that just kind of helps with all of that. At the end of the project and project closeout, you can just go back even across systems, and there's a need to kind of see what went on in each phase of the project, for sure.
So two things I would pick up on that as well. So email is always a challenge. You even go into these baseline
Mm.
platforms. To your point, if email's flowing from now 3, 4, 5 systems, some of which are yours and some of which are not, that really compounds the issue quite a bit. The other thing that I think is a challenge for IT pros is getting their end users, and I would argue even some IT pros, out of the belief that I'm going to put it. So the industry spent a long time writing paragraph length titles to documents and folders nested ad infinitum. Well, about 256 layers, right? So that I think is one of the challenges for IT as well. It is no longer on prem. If it is on prem, it is not on prem much longer. There's just no reason for it. The manufacturers aren't supporting it, and I think that's a real central challenge for the IT pro is getting their customers, their constituents, to buy into better interoperability, better automation, consistent meta descriptors as part of the journey and the continued challenges for IT pros. Like, do you have any thoughts or sort of stories on that, Shaylee? Where we've witnessed these kind of challenges?
Yeah, definitely in a lot of places and companies, we've seen that everybody is used to file folders, and that's how people have been kind of working for years. And there's basically a whole folder for a project with then innumerable subfolders under it, just making it so hard to even find documents. It doesn't matter what system they're using, but just the whole concept of using file folders. And it's hard for IT pros to kind of communicate that to end users that, okay, this in the longer run, it's going to be very difficult. And kind of moving away from that old system where they're very used to putting everything in file folders. The file is buried under 10 levels of folders, and then you have to just, there are so many clicks to even get to a document, and making sure people name these folders correctly, name the documents correctly, and not having any other metadata to find content. It's all of it. I think it's a big problem. And then we've seen organizations with so much data that has already existed in this way, and it's a big problem for the IT department to now kind of help them get out of it, basically.
Yeah, the transitioning can cost you way too much money. I'm very big on net new and current. Like, as people move to better practices, just leave the old stuff in place, let it obsolesce, but just start with something better. And if you have projects that have been around longer, are going to be going for a long time, those I would retrofit. But it goes back to, again, this breaking of the mindset, right? You mentioned how IT pros have to go to their users and convince them not to stuff so many things in folders or to email as much. Likewise, there's a tendency to jam everything in one place. We've seen folks, who were attempting to use SharePoint, and what do? They just literally moved over their file for folder system into a SharePoint site. You now have paid for expensive cloud storage. That is my view of that. And so that mind shift has to be broken all over the place, right? Both from the end user and the IT pro to go, look, there's a better way to orchestrate taxonomy. Taxonomy, metadata means you have meaningful data that AI can chew on, that won't be garbage, that will provide for a meaningful data warehouse. It all kind of connects together in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where the automation is then really necessary because, as you mentioned, putting everything in one single SharePoint site is not the solution.
It's a
But then
problem.
it's a lot of overhead on IT to set up different sites, make sure they have that consistent library structure and metadata and security. So it's a lot of overhead on IT if they're manually setting all of that up, which is where, and then maintaining
And
it.
then maintaining it. People come and go on projects constantly. Yeah, automation is pretty much everything, and that was one of the comments I had in observations, both on our Procore and Autodesk roundups and the end of year one, was it was really great to see, though, how many companies have now recognized this and have started their own internal initiatives, either to solve for or to commission products like our own or somewhere in between those challenges. I saw personally a great thaw in moving in a new direction that is just better for the industry. But topic is about challenges for IT pros. So those are a couple of the big ones. I think what else there is out there. Oh, so another challenge for IT pros, we talked about it briefly, was the management of permissions and security. And again, with all the various platforms in play, this is exponential. So Shaylee, we automate the security and governance of the M365 component that Project Ready applies process over.
Mhm.
Question for you: Are is that even possible currently programmatically with Procore and Autodesk?
Yeah, it's definitely possible programmatically. Both Autodesk and Procore do have APIs, but their permissioning is a little bit different than what we do with M365, where we can have library level permissions. In both Procore and Autodesk, it's more at the level of what workflows they have access to, what licenses they have in the two system. So there are different implications on based on what they have access to. We do, however, support templates with both Procore and ACC. So that would be our solution with managing the members in those systems, where if you can create templates and apply those template permissions, then we would be able to take care of that as well.
Gotcha. And it also talks to, it's kind of like the challenge we have, well, with submittals. So with submittals, folks, we are waiting for Workbridge for ACC to release the appropriate APIs. We say this often because we're waiting. But the challenge with submittals is there's so many nuances in terms and uh, where things relate to what at what stage of that workflow, somewhat in kind. Like you had showed me the user setup screen in ACC. To your point, which module, what can they do? There's a lot of
Mhm.
switches over there. It's not just read write access, right?
Mhm. Yep, definitely. There are a lot of different subtle permissions and things that need to be set up for each platform. But definitely, they are in ACC as well as Procore. They are incorporating all of these in the templatization of projects, which then just makes that easier to implement as well.
Yeah, the trick is for the IT pro is to stop getting caught up in minutia and be freed up to do the high value stuff that IT pros do. And so that, designing the correct templates, maintaining the templates, this is much better than going in and just sort of hand tooling everything. And to your point, the manufacturer is already there trying to help the IT professional.
Hmm. Exactly.
So I guess the long and short of it, everyone, is that not only do IT professionals have this constant challenge of working with lean budgets and quick timelines, with the AEC, it's all multiplicative, right, for all these different platforms. And so when you're trying to run that kind of efficiency and trying to get value from the high value employees that you have in IT, simplifying ongoing maintenance, automating whatever and wherever you can means that the IT professional has more bandwidth to contribute their unique skill sets to help the company be more profitable and better run. That's kind of a quick wrap up on the IT Pro. As always, any thoughts on future podcasts, info at project-ready.com. Please do let us know. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.